Good morning, John. It's Wednesday. Now, you've probably never heard of me, and if I'm totally honest, you're probably not going to see this video, but just in case, hi, my name's Dan, and some of the Nerdfighters know me as Pastor Dan. Now, normally when I talk about things on the internet, I'm talking about faith or religion, hence the moniker, but a video of yours that I saw recently is taking me out of my profession into one of the things that I obsess over, and that is comic book characters. John, we gotta talk about Batman. Now, before I get started, I do want to point out that I'm not going to say that you should or have to like Batman. I mean, obviously you don't have to like anything. But after a recent video of yours, I think you need to imagine Batman more complexly. Which is sort of ironic, given that he's an imaginary character. Now, in your video, you seem to imply that Bruce Wayne / Batman was just some rich white guy using his wealth to get weapons to help him punch things better so that he could be the vigilante in Gotham City, which he wasn't very good at. And frankly, John, you really missed the mark there. Now, whether you're reading the comics, watching the cartoons, or just watching the movies, there are constant references to the charitable works that Bruce Wayne is doing all over Gotham City. Often working through an institution called the Thomas and Martha Wayne Foundation, Bruce Wayne has built museums, orphanages, all sorts of infrastructure for the city. He is constantly giving back to the people of Gotham, and not just by punching bad guys. I mean, compare that to the charitable works of Superman, and it completely blows it away. I mean, the best the Man of Steel ever did was try to get rid of nuclear war, and that went so badly it killed his franchise for 19 years. But my real problem with your video was not your lack of understanding about Bruce Wayne's charitable giving. I mean, if you're not a huge fan of the series, and it's clear that you're not, that would be pretty easy to miss. The real problem is not in your understanding of his actions, but rather in your evaluation of his motives. It is really easy to write Bruce Wayne off as some rich guy who acts out a power fantasy because he's rich enough to carry it out, but that's actually not the case with any of the iterations of his character. I mean, we're talking about a kid who watched his parents get murdered right in front of him and goes on a quest to end crime, not to get even with those that did it to him, but to see to it that no one would ever have to feel that kind of pain ever again. In fact, I would even argue that it's not accurate to call Batman a vigilante because he's so clearly not interested in taking the law into his own hands. Batman never participates in the judgment or the punishment of any of the criminals he brings in. He never imprisons anyone. He never intentionally kills anyone. He captures them and then he hands them over to the authorities for judgment. In fact, given how often that he's working directly in cooperation with the authorities, there's hardly anything vigilante about him at all. But perhaps the most interesting thing about Batman and his story is how, with any other story originating from his time, he probably would have been a bad guy. Wealthy, but by way of inheritance, a figure in a huge corporation, a brilliant scientist, themed around bats. I mean, this is a villain in most stories, but here he is not, and I think that's so fascinating. I mean, it's obvious that Bruce Wayne is a very capable individual, but he's also a very damaged one. I mean, he's been through such a traumatic event and is so capable and so obsessive. It would be so easy for this to be a completely revenged, obsessed monster, and yet he is not, and I think that represents something beautiful. There are a lot of people out there who have very traumatic events in their lives, events that have come to define them as people. But even when those things exist, I think it's nice to believe that we can choose how they affect us, that we don't have to let them turn us into monsters, and that instead we can use them to become heroes. John, I will see you later.